All right, so before we jump into our projects, I just want to go over my environment and what I'll be using. And there's not much to talk about because this is just vanilla JavaScript and HTML and CSS, so there's no frameworks or anything like that. Basically, the text editor I'm using is VS Code, Visual Studio Code, and that's what I recommend. That it's really popular in the web dev community. I'm sure a lot of you, if not most of you, are already using it, but you don't have to. You can use Sublime Text or Atom or something like that, or some other IDE. That's absolutely fine. But if you want to follow along to a T with this course, then I would suggest using VS Code, which you can get from code.visualstudio.com. Now I just want to jump into VS Code real quick, and I just have my project starter, which we're actually going to create in the next video. But I want to talk a little bit about the extensions I'm using as well as Emmet. So Emmet is a tool that's pre-installed with VS Code. If you're using something like Atom or Sublime Text, you have to install Emmet as a plugin or an extension. And it just helps you write faster HTML. So if I want an H1, just H1 enter will give me my tags. If I want to add a class, I can do dot and then my class enter. If I want to do two classes, I could say my class 2 enter. If I want to do an ID, I can do number sign and say my ID. It gives me an H1 with an ID. If I want an ID and a class, I can do that. Okay, and if I'm using a div, I don't even need to, I can do div and then my class like that, but we don't even need to add the div. We can just do dot my class enter, and it will automatically give us a div. Same with the ID. Okay, and if we wanted like 3 divs, we could say div and then times 3. That'll give us 3 divs. So that's about the extent that I'll be using Emmet to. I do have a complete crash course on YouTube on Emmet if you want to learn more about it. All right, now let's take a look at the extensions I'm using. So you don't need the only one I would really suggest is Live Server. That will allow you to open our project on a development server that will auto reload whenever we save either the HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. It'll auto reload so we don't have to keep clicking the reload button. Other than that, I'm using auto rename tag, which just renames the end HTML tag once you rename the beginning tag. Pretty self-explanatory. Bracket pair colorizer, it just colorizes your brackets, your parentheses, and curly braces. You can see these outer curly braces are purple, the inner ones are blue. If I had another set nested in the if, those would be a different color as well. And then I'm also using Prettier, which is a code formatter. As far as formatting your code, it's completely up to you. I like to use single quotes as opposed to double quotes in my JavaScript. I also don't use semicolons. And to set that stuff, you can just go to your settings with either command comma, or you can just click on the gear down here and go to settings. And if you search for Prettier, there's a bunch of options here for your code. I'm going to go down to this option here. You can see I have semi unchecked. I'm not using semicolons. I also have single quote checked, tab width of 2. So it's completely up to you on how you want to format your code. And I'm also using format on save. You can see that's checked. What that means is if something is wrong, it'll fix it when I save. So for instance, even in the HTML, if I'm like over here and I save, it goes back into place. If I go into my JavaScript and I create a variable here, like const x equals double quote, we'll just say test and put a semicolon. If I save, it formats it to the way that I specified, which is no semicolons and single quotes. All right, so I'm just going to get rid of that, and that's it. Pretty simple stuff. You can, of course, use whatever text editor you want, whatever settings you want. I just wanted to show you what I'm working with. All right, so in the next video, we're going to start to create this little project starter, which we're going to use as a boilerplate for all of our projects in this course.